genetics. We're going to do an introduction to genetics today where we'll look at the father of genetics, Mendel, a little bit of background there, and then you have a million vocabulary words that you have to memorize for this unit, so we'll go through all the vocab, and that's how we'll start genetics. So we'll start with Gregor Mendel. He lived from 1822 to 1844, and here he is in his garden with his pea plants. He's responsible for figuring out the laws of genetics. He was an Austrian monk, and he spent a lot of his time on pea plants. So he studied the inheritance of traits in pea plants, and the stuff that he figured out applies to us too. So when we figure out if your mom has type A blood and your dad has type B blood, what type blood could you have? We use all of the laws that Mendel figured out. Between 1856 and 1863, so not even 10 years, Mendel cultivated and tested some 28,000 pea plants. Whoa. 28,000 pea plants, that's a lot of pea plants. And he found that the plant's offspring retained the traits of their parents. So for example, if there was a pea plant with white flowers and it was mated with another pea plant with white flowers, the offspring would all have white flowers. And this is his, the area where his garden was. So now we have vocab. I have a million vocabulary words. Some of them you know already, and some of them will be new. Particulate inheritance. Mendel lived before we knew anything about DNA, before we could talk about genes, so he made up his own word for it. Mendel stated that physical traits are inherited as particles. So in other words, we didn't know back then, people didn't know if traits were blended and then more like, you know, if you have green Play-Doh and blue Play-Doh and you mix them together, you get this kind of funky color and you can't really separate them. He said, no, these particles are separate. These are different things. So if you have a red plant and you made it with a red plant, well, you can get all kinds of different babies. Maybe you can get white plants. It's not like you're going to get only red plants or pink plants or whatever. So these traits are these individual separate things, and that's what he figured out. Mendel did not know that the particles were actually DNA and chromosomes. So chromosomes made out of DNA. A trait is any characteristic that can be passed from a parent to an offspring. So an example of a trait in a pea plant would be the color of the flowers, the color of the seeds, the shape of the seeds. Are they round or are they wrinkled? The height of the plant, whether it flowers at the very tips of the plant or whether the flowers are somewhere along the stem. A trait in a person might be whether or not you have dimples, whether or not you have a cleft chin, whether your eyes are blue or green or brown, your skin color, your height to some degree, all that kind of thing. So the examples, you can put in whatever you'd like. I'm going to put in the Asian ears here. Would any of my kids inherit my beautiful, enormous Asian ears or not? Another trait, let's see, a good trait in my family. Oh, I know, my husband's awful knees. So my husband has these awful knees that pop out of joint. Would the kids get any of that? So those are just examples of traits in humans. Examples in a pea, again, might be the color of the flowers. So flower color might be, let's see, the pea itself, pea shape. So there's a bunch of different traits, and we'll look at those. Heredity. Heredity is the passing of traits from a parent to an offspring. So will my kids get my blue eyes or my husband's brown eyes? And genetics, the study of heredity. So we use those words pretty interchangeably. Okay, types of genetic crosses. We're going to do a couple of types of genetic crosses. The first is called a monohybrid cross. So you remember probably that mono means one. So this is a cross involving just one trait. So for example, flower color. We have a white flower and we're going to mate it with another white flower, and what kind of babies are we going to get? We don't care about while we're looking at the flower color, we don't really care at this point about the flower location or the seed color or the seed shape or any other trait. We're looking at this point at just one trait. Now, if you wanted to see how two things are inherited together, you could do a dihybrid cross, di for two. So this is a cross involving two traits. So for example, we might care about the flower color and the plant height. So a purple flower that's short, crossed with a white flower that's tall, and what are you going to get from this? The H was for height. So the P was for purple or white. So we're looking at two traits. Now, some kids get confused and think if you have a purple plant and you're mating it with a white plant, that's two traits. But we're looking at the color. So in this case, flower color is one trait, and these are different variations of the trait. Two traits would be flower color and how tall the flower is. Those are two totally different traits. So that would be a dihybrid cross. In a person, for a dihybrid cross, you might wonder, for example, if freckles and red hair are going to be inherited together. Or you might wonder if blue eyes and brown hair will be inherited together. A gene is a piece of DNA that codes for a trait. So Mendel didn't call them genes, but we're going to. And an allele is a form or a variation of the gene. It's usually dominant and recessive, although there are codominant and incomplete dominant alleles as well, and we'll talk about those as we get through this unit. These words, gene and allele, we talked about in our last unit, the meiosis unit. So these are words that I think you're already familiar with. In this case, the gene might be for flower color. And the allele would be, is it purple? Another allele would be for white. So what's the form or the variation of the gene? So in this case, the gene is the color, and the allele is it purple or is it white? An example would be a gene for flower color in peas. Oh, that's kind of scary. It can be either purple or white. So the allele would be purple or white, and the gene would be color. Okay, dominant. These next few are kind of intuitive. So this is the allele that is expressed in the hybrid. So you usually represent that with a capital letter. So for example, purple would be big P, and little p would be white. And so if you have a plant that has a big P and a big P, you get an allele from mom and an allele from dad. So if it's big P, it would be purple. And if it's little p, it would be white. And if it gets a big P from its mom and a little p from its dad, then it's actually still going to be purple, because the big P is dominant. And so if you have one big P, I'm supposed to be making that look like a big one. If you have one big P or two big Ps, here you've got two, here you've got one big P, still looks the same, still purple. So recessive is the allele that is not expressed when a dominant allele is present. So we usually show it with a lowercase letter, and it's only present when both alleles are there and are recessive. So for example, again, big P, little p, purple, white. This is going to be a purple plant. And the little p doesn't influence this trait at all. It's almost like it's not there. It could still be inherited, but it's not shown. It doesn't show up in this organism. It would show up if you had two little p's. So little p would be a white flower. And so that's what recessive means. Genotype. This is the gene combination for a trait. So they come in twos because you have one from mom, one from dad. So do you have big R, little r, or little r, little r? So for example, if you have a cleft in your chin, that would be little c, little c. And so you have a little c from mom and a little c from dad. If you don't have a cleft in your chin, it's big C, or big C, little c. And so this is for having a cleft, this is no cleft, and this one would also be no cleft because that one's dominant. So that would be your genotype. Your phenotype is what you actually look like. So this is the physical feature resulting from a genotype. So with my cleft example, this person would look the same as this person. They have different genotypes, different gene combinations, but the same phenotype because they both have no cleft. So another example would be with pea plants. This one happens to be this beautiful red color, and so let's assume that red is dominant. This thing is red, and I can see it's red, right? Hello, it's pretty red anyway. Big R could be its genotype, or its genotype could be big R, little r. I don't know until I cross it and figure it out. But the phenotype is that it's red. The genotype is what is the actual gene combination, and you can't always tell that from the phenotype. Now, if that were a white flower, I could probably say, yeah, the genotype would be little r, little r. An example of genotype and phenotype in flowers. So for this example, the genotype of the alleles could be big R would be a red flower, little r would be, in this case, a yellow flower. All genes occur in pairs because you get one from mom and one from dad, so two alleles affect the trait. And so here are the possible combinations. You could have genotypes big R, or genotype big R, or little r, little r. So this is what the traits, your DNA actually shows you. Your phenotypes, this one would be red, this one would be red, and this last one would be yellow. So these two have the same phenotype, but they have different genotypes. And this one has a different phenotype and genotype compared to the others. A couple more definitions. Homozygous. Homo means same. So homozygous genotype, this is a gene combination involving two dominant or two recessive alleles. So the alleles are the same, either big R, or little r, little r. If you're talking about plants, you also sometimes call it pure. Big R is certainly no better than big R, little r, but we call it a pure trait because that's what Mendel called them. So if you have, how did he say it? If you have a white plant, little r, and you made it with another white plant, they will always produce babies that are white. And so that he would call pure. He would also call it pure if the mom was big R, and the dad was big R, and they mated, and all the babies would always be big R. And so that would be true breeding or a pure line because they're all red. They're all the same color. Another one, hetero means different. So these are heterozygous genotypes. The gene combination of one is one dominant and one recessive allele. So the alleles are different. So you've got big R, little r. Sometimes you call this a hybrid, especially when you're talking about plants. So if you have a big R, little r, and you mate it with pea plants, you can mate them with themselves. We'll do the Punnett square. Actually, why don't I just do it now? If you do the Punnett square out, which I'll teach you about more with our next one, you're going to have, this one will make the gametes big R and the gametes little r, and so with that one, you can get some offspring that are red and some offspring that are white, mostly red. In this case, that's not what he would call a purebred. That would say when you mate it with itself, some of its babies look like it does, and some of its babies look different. So that he would call a hybrid. We call it heterozygous.
Wow, that actually explains a lot.
I know, isn't that so cool, little apple? Okay, that's it for now.